Hi everyone, this is Leanne and this is From the Heart. And today I have Christopher Balkaran, who's been on my podcast before, where we were speaking about just having different opinions and how can we hold everyone's opinions and be more respectful of those kinds of things and move out of division and being able to listen to one another. And today, so I've been like kind of following Christopher and he's been kind of deep diving into immigration, especially around students. And it's over my head. And I was like, I want to know about this because this is important. What's happening in Canada and immigration is important to us as Canadians. Right now, we're having a really huge focus on ICE and what's happening in another country. I know it's the closest country to us, but it's distracting us from what's happening right in front of our noses. I was also talking to someone who was like, okay, how is this related to health and what I do and like what I'm trying to speak about? And I will say, like in the case of immigration, and I could like talk about the other things that I was talking about earlier on my podcast, but immigration does affect the health of us as Canadians, like our healthcare system and things like that. And we can talk a little bit about that. But it also affects the health of the immigrants and what they're walking into and the health system that we have and, you know, what we can and cannot do for these people. So we can talk a little bit about that. But Christopher, do you want to give us another introduction just in case someone isn't like a regular follower?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Leanne, and thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Christopher Balkaran. I have a very active YouTube channel where I post almost every other day now under my full name, Christopher Balkaran, and really it's about explaining policy decisions by our government that, in my opinion at least, often they don't include Canadian voices, they don't include the general public, and the downstream impacts on our communities, our overall health and well-being are really affected. So I try on my channel to demystify policy, as tough as that is. And I'm very active on my Instagram as well under Open Minds Pod. I run the Open Minds podcast with Christopher Balkaran that Leanne follows, and we've been in touch for a very long time. And it's just been great kind of cultivating this community of like-minded Canadians, Americans, Europeans who want to see more accountability and openness about these discussions.
Yeah. The way that I would describe you is like factual and objective rather than like, you know, taking on a side where it's more like emotional sort of decision making or kind of blindfold. That's how I would kind of describe you. And I wish you had, like, you do have your own news channel. But that's how I see you, like a news broadcaster.
Thanks, Leanne. I really appreciate that. You know, it's not always easy, but I do enjoy doing this for work. I think it's like a labor of love at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel that from you, the labor of love.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Do you want to give us a synopsis of what you've seen around student immigration or immigration in general, if you want to go there, or we can stick to student immigration if that's what you're knowledgeable about.
Yeah, no, of course. You know, I think immigration is just such an important issue for us as Canadians to talk about. I'm a first generation immigrant. You know, my parents came in the 1980s to Canada as economic immigrants from Guyana, and they raised myself and my sister. I was a little toddler at the time, but over time, especially over the past few years, we've seen a rapid shift in immigration. Before there were, quote, manageable levels of a few 100,000 per year. But in the past few years, we've averaged over 1 million temporary foreign workers and international students. And this is reshaping communities, neighborhoods. A lot of Canadians have questions. Most are from India, so there's a cultural change as well happening. But because we're so polite as a country, we are absolutely terrified to speak about this issue. And so I've been really going into a deep dive on what's changed and why.
I think a lot of people are afraid. They're afraid of being
Yeah.
labeled as racist.
Yeah.
And I have like a lot of thoughts and ideas about like this being afraid of being called racist
Hmm.
And like it really is superficial. And
Yeah.
we have to look deeper than that. We have to be less afraid of being called racist. There's a difference between like being a racist and being
Hmm.
called a racist. And it's so easy to just try to shut someone up and be like, you're racist. And
Yeah.
so my grandparents on my father's family are from India. And I'm
Hmm.
super not offended by like what I've heard you say.
Hmm.
And like the first person who talked to me about what was happening in Tim Hortons was my father. And then you're the
Wow.
second person who,
Wow.
so like the people who are concerned, like so my father coming from his ancestry from India, and he like identifies as like Goan, which is a
Hmm.
part of India, and so do I. Um, like yeah, like we're the ones who are concerned about what's happening. So like the thing that my father was saying is just that he was really like, why is it that there's only like Indians working in Tim Hortons? How are they being paid? Like, do you want to talk about like the workforce and what like these people are coming into? What are they walking into when they're coming to Canada?
Yeah, it's, I think that it's even more important, Leanne, that us as Indian descendants talk about this in Canada because there's a real power that we have. I think if this was being talked about by, like quote unquote white Canadians, a lot of people would say, well, they're racist. They would add that label. But for us, I think it's even more important because of our background and what we're seeing in Canada. So the reason this is important is because at its core, it's like exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents coming here as economic immigrants, they were able to continue, their studies. My dad's an MBA, become an accountant, continue his career, raise his family. My mom, office job, working at one of the major banks. Um, that's the Canadian like immigration story for economic immigrants. You studied abroad, you come here, you continue your professional designation, your professional career. What's happened now, and I think that the government saw this happening in the early 2000s, is that Canada was on its way to a population cliff. We have an aging population, and we don't have a high fertility rate in Canada. We have one of the lowest fertility rates in all of the G7. Not nearly as low as like Japan, South Korea, or Italy, but it is very low. Um, and in order for Canada to survive and thrive, a growing population is needed. And so I think what they saw was while the economic immigration stream was good, and like we had hundreds of thousands coming in, and I just want to mention this too, the majority of permanent residents today are still from the economic immigration stream, like 64%. So we're still very much an economic immigration system for permanent residency and citizenship. But what many companies, corporations, and lobby groups petitioned to the government was we need a steady stream of low wage, low skilled labor to fill labor shortages. And so, what they did in the mid 2010s, in particular, is they allowed in more international students than ever before with pathways that they've never seen before to permanent residency. So before, if you were an international student, you'd come to Canada, you'd get your education, and you'd go back to your home country and apply for permanent residency to Canada or to the US or to England or wherever. But now what the government did in 2014 is they said, come to study, but while you're studying, you can obtain a work permit and you can use your study and work permit towards a permanent residency application. And this really opened the floodgates for a lot of international students, particularly from India, to come to Canada with the dream and hope of getting PR. And why India? A lot of people ask me, like, why India? And it's because in certain regions of India, specifically in Punjab, coming to Canada is like the gold standard. It's like everyone's dream is to send their kid to Canada. And the reason why is because in Punjab, there's high youth unemployment, very limited opportunities to continue higher education because there's a youth population boom happening in India right now. There's like 300 million people between the ages of 18 to 24. So there's very few university seats for these kids. So you literally have these young people in Punjab province in particular who are like, they have no employment or they're underemployed, no prospects for college and university. And they're looking around being like, what do I do? Like, I've just finished, I'm at the top of my class and I still can't get into a university. Like, what's going on? So the easier path, quote unquote, is for their parents to sell land or sell a home, like 20, 30,000, and send them on a one-way ticket to Canada, with 20 to 30,000 so they can show the government they have money and get into a college there and then start paying rent and like let them piece together a few jobs so that they can obtain permanent residency and then sponsor their family from back home. That's a long-winded answer, but that's at its core what's happening. It's an influx of international students from India to obtain permanent residency. But the government has really shifted, and we can chat about that too.
Mm. So these students are coming in, they're getting jobs at $18 an hour, and then they have to fend for themselves, and then they have to send money back home. Like they feel obliged, like their heart feels obliged. It's a cultural thing, like that there's like strong family bonds when we come and stuff like that. So then I've heard, so you can like tell me what you know. I've heard that they like work like long hours, like beyond what we would do.
Yeah, this is where the story gets really dark. So what's really happening is these colleges like Sheridan, Seneca, and others, they have no idea of how to get international students to Canada or from India to Canada. They don't know. So they depend on recruiters usually, and this is where it gets very shady. So take an Indian family in Punjab with, let's say, a young son or daughter, 18, 19 years old. There's so many recruiters in Punjab trying to get these students to Canada. These recruiters make a few $1,000s per student per year that they get them to Canada. So there's a lot of money here at play. So the family will pay the recruiter $2,000. The student will come to Canada, and part of their fee, and some recruiters charge like $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. So part of their fee of getting to Canada and getting a job lined up for them, say at a Tim Hortons or whatever, is they come to Canada and they're already indebted to the recruiter because the recruiter not only got them to Canada, they got them a job and they got them a room to rent. So they come to Canada, they land with like $25,000 in debt to the recruiter. They go to Tim Hortons, they make minimum wage, but their wages are garnished to pay the recruiter. So while they might be making $18 an hour, about 50% of that is garnished off their pay to the recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
They then live in a $400 a month room in a rooming house, and they have to study at school. So there's a full-time student is studying like 15, 20 hours, like that's their course load, and they're working two jobs. It is indentured servantry, basically. Like you are permanently indebted to the recruiter, and you're less likely to say anything about labor conditions, working long hours, anything. Because if you say anything, they're sending you right back to Punjab, and the shame to your family is very high that you failed in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver. Again, I know this is a lot of information, so I'll pause there.
Yeah. Who are these recruiters? Are they Canadians?
No, so many times it's just a shadow recruitment network of recruiters in India that colleges use and depend on. And colleges get out of the business of recruiting because they can say, hey, I don't know what that recruiter is doing. I just paid a third party up. Like whatever situation they arrange with the student is outside my control. So it absolves the college from taking any responsibility of any shady practices the recruiters are doing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It makes it harder for us to do something about it.
It makes it almost impossible, and I think it's by design, to be honest. They don't want Canadians knowing about this.
Oh,
yeah.
All right. So I'm just like thinking, where else do I want to go with this? Do you know, like, when it comes to overall immigrants, do you know what the Canadian process is and how we prioritize who comes in and all that? Like, do you know the process?
Yeah, and again, I know it's a very fluid situation with the current government because they are making a lot of reforms, and I will say that the current government is cracking down a lot on this kind of like the PR farms that have happened, and no longer is it the case that a post-graduation work permit can count towards PR. I mean, they are really, really cracking down on that. So I give the federal government some credit. Um, the targets as well for international students have dramatically dropped. I think it's by 50%. So don't quote me. Someone online will definitely say that, but I believe it's about 50% lower than where it was before. But to answer your question, the way in which, again, like Canada still heavily relies on economic immigrants to make up the majority of our permanent resident applications. Um, but what's happening with international students is they now fill this low wage sector, low wage, low skill sector job sector, and they're competing with other Canadians that are applying. So, like youth unemployment in Canada has never been this high in like 15-ish years. It's around 15% nationally. And in some regions, it's up to 22%. So it's extremely high. We've never seen these numbers for youth unemployment. Um, and this is partially why, this is actually completely why. Like, why would Tim Hortons hire a young Canadian who knows their labor rights for $18 an hour when they can hire someone who doesn't know their labor rights for the same wage and work them longer hours? And even if that person complains or they get sent back to India, there's a steady stream of them coming in all the time. So, Restaurant Brands International, the conglomerate that owns Tim Hortons, they were in hot water in Grimsby, Ontario, because their Tim Hortons was completely staffed by international students and foreign workers, despite so many people in the community applying for jobs there at that Tim Hortons. And there was a lot of public outcry, and then eventually they changed their policy and they started hiring locals. But it just goes to show the shady underground networks of how people are coming to Canada to fill like this low wage, low sector job market. And it's at its core, it's indentured servantry, it's exploitation, and it's by design. It's truly by design because certain lobby groups, like there are certain lobby groups who lobby the government specifically for these pipelines to stay open and stay consistent. So it's a very, very dangerous story that's happening in Canada right now.
Mm. When you were saying about the Tim Hortons somewhere in Ontario, where they changed their policy because of
Yeah.
outcry, that just shows us our power. So,
Yeah.
And then what else? You're saying that there's people lobbying to continue doing what we're doing. Do you know who they are? Do you
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because I'm a nerd about this stuff and I go down all these rabbit holes, I went on anyone can do this, by the way. You can go on the federal government's website and you can look at the lobbying registry of who's lobbying whom. And you can literally just see all the different meetings that who a minister meets with. Because if they're meeting with a lobbyist, they have to be registered. And all that information is public. So again, I give the government some credit in posting this information because people like me go through all the Excel data. But there's one council in particular, the Retail Council of Canada, RCC. Anyone can look them up. They represent the big retailers in Canada. And I didn't know this, but the retail jobs in Canada represent like a good percentage of Canadian employment. A lot of Canadians are employed in the retail sector, and they contribute billions to our GDP and to our economy. So they have very strong lobbying efforts. And what I found with the Retail Council of Canada is they've posted reports about labor shortages coming out of the pandemic, saying like, listen, man, the retail sector was hit the hardest. People didn't want to apply to retail jobs. People were scared of transmission, etc. So as a result, there's these gaps, there's these shortages of labor, and it affects so many communities and so many companies So what we need from the sector is a commitment from the government to fill those labor shortages. And so when you go onto the federal government's lobbying registry, you'll see just tons of meetings the Retail Council of Canada's had with our former, and I think current, but mostly former immigration minister. And the topic is immigration. It's not about like labor. It's not about like the retail sector. It's about immigration. And so, of course, I'm piecing these things together in my mind. And I'm like, well, why would the Retail Council of Canada meet with the minister incessantly, like it's month after month, year after year, on immigration? And it can only mean one thing, because at this time we start seeing that influx of temporary foreign workers, international students. The Retail Council of Canada lobbied the government to make sure that the international students who are taking a full course load could also work up to 30 hours a week. So imagine you're a student, you've got a full course load, and you can work up to 30 hours. I mean, what time do you have left to do anything? Like, why would they lobby the government for that? Right? It's so odd. And I think I'm just scratching the surface, because I'd love to go into a little bit more detail on some of the content of those meetings, but that's perhaps for another deep dive on a video for sure.
Okay. Let me see here. Do you want to talk a bit about health, just because that's like what I talk about? Yeah. What are immigrants coming in with, and what do they need help with, and how is it impacting your healthcare system?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that a lot of people, sometimes when we talk immigration, we don't talk about the health impacts. For many international students, they don't have access to our public healthcare system. So again, I'm going to just pause there, because when you're young, sure, like, you may not have chronic health issues as older adults do, 100%. But just knowing that you're now not on our public healthcare system means that you're less likely to even get checked out for recurring, illness, disease, etc. That puts strain on our healthcare system. And I've been trying to find like quantitative data about the impact specifically of foreign workers, international students on local health networks. I haven't found it. And I think it's because when you're not part of the public healthcare system, I guess they can't track that data meaningfully. So when you're outside the public healthcare system, you now have to pay for your healthcare. We as Canadians, we take it for granted that we can go to like a walk-in clinic or like the hospital, but there are people who live amongst us that they have to pay for those services. So if you're already indebted to a recruiter tens of thousands of dollars and you're sick, you're probably not going to the walk-in clinic. Like on your list of things to do, you're not doing that. So it has a real impact on our healthcare. The other piece to this is the amount of healthcare spending. I don't think it's proportionate to the number of international students and foreign workers coming into Canada knowing that information, because we do know the majority of international students and foreign workers, they settle in very specific locations in the country, like our big cities, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, but even within them, like specific regions like Brampton, Ontario, Surrey, BC. So not enough information has been shared about the impact this has on those local health networks in those regions and the outreach that they're doing to students in particular and foreign workers. And again, I think that's by design because of this transactional relationship, the indentured servant nature. It's like if you have a health issue and you can't work, like, see, go back to India, we'll get 10 more. And that's the transactional nature of this shift towards temporary labor. Remember, economic immigrants don't have that issue. Once you get PR status, you have access, your kids have access, you can you're very much part of the Canadian identity on healthcare. For foreign workers and international students, they're excommunicated for a very clear reason, and it's because they're disposable. It's really sad and it's really tragic.
Wow. So just so people understand, when you're the care provider, what you see when people can't afford care, they show up when it's like way beyond like
Exactly.
prevention. So if you've got a broken bone, you don't want to do anything about it. You're going to be coming in like not when your
Yep.
bone broke, but much later, and when things are worse, and then you have like health, like your whatever bone you broke is going to be worse for the rest of your life and things like that.
Mhm.
And then some of
Exactly.
the workers don't get paid if you're not employed. Doctors are not employed, and so then like they can't get paid. And then if you ever show up again to the hospital, people will call the doctors, the people on the floor, and be like, that person didn't pay their last bill. And they give each
Exactly.
other a big heads up. Anyways, that's just a little bit of what happens like to us as care providers, but like
And
also.
Leanne, on that point, sorry to cut you off, but like I'd love to know from you too, like the follow-up. So say you break a bone and you have to pay for it out of pocket, or you're from a community where you're excommunicated from that public healthcare. Are you more likely to follow up and make sure that like that um that limb is stabilized? Because what I've seen in the research from the US is many communities, especially the low-income Black communities in particular, um, the health outcomes are lower because like the access isn't there and the follow-up also isn't there to go back, right? So like I'm assuming it's the same for international students and foreign workers. Like they may break a bone, but they may not do that care for that broken arm consistently to make sure it heals properly.
In the States, it's a little bit different. So let's say you break a bone. In the States, you can like sue the park that you broke your bone in.
Oh
And
wow.
then you wait for that money to come in, which will take a long time for you to remove your cast. So like they'll put a cast on you because it's like
Oh
emergent, but
yeah,
then it takes a long time for you to get the money to do the things that aren't emergency. And in Canada, we
I
don't
see.
have like this suing system as
Hmm.
hard, like as ingrained in our culture.
Hmm.
So, and I would know more about like the birth aspect,
Hmm.
and midwives actually do take care of people who don't have OHIP in
Hmm.
Ontario, anyways. Not everywhere in Canada, but and so we like what would they just avoid the system, like they're avoiding the system on every cost if they're not
Hmm.
like I'd be able to take as a if I'd be working, I'd be able to take care of someone who has been here but has been hiding from the system, because
Hmm.
it's just the way, like it's a good thing that we
Yeah.
can't do that, but yeah, they're totally avoiding the system.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting.
Mm, yeah. And then like just for other people to hear, like if you're coming in and you're an immigrant, you have there's more infectious diseases that are coming in, there's more mental health stuff that's coming in, um, and so then like our healthcare system will just have to take on, like let's say hepatitis, and then we have to like help them with that sometimes. Like it's like fairly easy to take care of someone that has hepatitis, but sometimes it's really difficult. So
Hmm.
like yeah, it's nice to be able to take care of those people, but then so like this is another question, is because there's such a huge influx of people coming in. I've heard from even from lefties, like
Hmm.
people who like are like really pro gung ho people coming in. They're saying that in Ottawa, these healthcare providers are saying that in Ottawa, like that in the schooling system, that if you um, like if you have a child that has any sort of special need in in the school systems, they're not going to be able to provide that extra care that we had like when we were
Wow.
children. So that's what I've heard from people who are like really really left, like if I tell them like you just said something that the right people are saying, they are so offended. So like it's those people
Yeah.
are saying the same thing. And like I just so like going to schools in places where there's less immigrants, more in the outskirts of Ottawa, apparently have more um, one-on-one for children that need more of that.
Yeah.
So I've heard that as well. Do you know anything about like the impacts of like, things like that?
I don't know the specifics, but on your point about like the left, saying that, man, this is I always think that the left and the right, people on the extremes, they have these ideas, but when it's implemented and results are not what they want, they find themselves in a very awkward position. So many on the left have been very pro-immigrant,
Mhm.
but many on the left would most likely not be in favor of what Canada has done over the past few years about this, exploitation of temporary foreign workers, international students. So they find themselves at this crossroads of pro-immigrant, but not against, but also against exploitation. And they don't want to come out and say, "Hey, I'm anti-immigrant." That they're fearful of saying that we've gone down, a rabbit hole here, and we should kind of bring the nose back up. Likewise, on the right, people are for, say, less regulation on business and capital to move between jurisdictions, etc. But then there's exploitation of workers. There's runaway capitalism, right? They stop paying taxes, or there's a tax code in place where it doesn't allow, it favors, high, more capital to flow freely. And suddenly, what they're confronted with is this ethical dilemma of like, yes, I want the free flow of capital, but I also recognize that people need to be paid properly. There should be well-paying jobs. There should be, a relatively okay tax burden, so that we're paying back into, our social welfare system. And so I think like when things get to the extreme, both the left and the right find themselves at these moral crossroads of, yes, I agree, but I didn't want that. Um, like I'm sure many in the US right now may have agreed with Donald Trump on reducing the number of illegal immigration, but they certainly are not in favor of what they're seeing in Minnesota. They're certainly not in favor of seeing this type of aggressive behavior.
Mhm.
And similarly on the left, I think people are in favor of, um, whether it's socialized Medicare or more government spending, but not to the point where there's high levels of unemployment. People can't afford daily things. The level of care isn't there. I mean, people would generally have real concerns with that. So that's what I found online, and that's perhaps where both of us find ourselves in these unique positions because we don't necessarily fit into those boxes too.
Mm. It's so important to be able to look at that though, and
Yeah.
I used to consider myself more of a lefty, and then I got broken uh, in a really good way, and
Yeah.
and then like it made me more objective, and
Hmm.
and I think that everyone is capable of doing that. Let's say we love the liberals, we can keep them accountable to do things that are
Yeah.
in line, and then if do the same thing with the right, whoever's in we perceive in charge.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives us a lot more power if we can look at things objectively and ask questions that are hard and might break us down at first and be like, oh, like I can't believe everything they say, and then it's a
Hmm.
big kind of like smack in the face at first, but then we move on and learn and become better people, and
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
um, yeah, it can also bring us down into a big spiral and not believing
Yeah.
in anything. And then that's immediate. And then
Hmm.
we'll raise ourselves up, you
Of
know?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's important for us to do that. Yeah.
Um, all right. So then we talked about the workforce. Um, okay, so this is another thing I heard, and I don't know how true it is. I have a feeling that there's some truth to it. Is it true that immigrants in Canada that are convicted of crime get can get less punishment so that they're not deported?
Yes. So I did some research before this podcast just on this. So I wanted to kind of read that out a little bit so that everything's like very clear. Um, so there are like 6 month triggers that are mandatory for that include mandatory deportation for non-citizens. So apparently there was a precedent set where some judges even issue sentences of 5 months and 29 days so that the mandatory deportation is not met. But this has sparked major debate where people now are saying, like, hang on, like, there's rules in place. So right now, yes, if you do commit a crime, um, mandatory deportation for non-citizens is in fact a real possibility. And so we're seeing that right now with the Humboldt Broncos tragedy, where a non-citizen ran a stoplight and tragically killed 16 members of a hockey 16 members of a hockey team on their bus in Western Canada. That person is not a citizen and is now facing deportation. And what's interesting is that when I go online, a lot of people are calling to say, "Hey, it was a mistake. You know, he's very sorry." He's written letters about that. But at the end of the day, the law kind of is the law, and he did break the law by running that stop sign, which he admitted. So if he's not deported, and this is the real challenge we have in Canada, if he's not deported, that will actually cause a lot of social unrest. People don't like to talk about that, but it will, because the laws are in place for a very clear reason. So, for example, like, I know there was proposed legislation before to prohibit considering immigration status in sentencing. But a lot of Canadians, I think, have pushed back on that. Right now, as of 2025, there's an inventory of 2.1 million applications with over 1 million in backlog. So our system is overloaded with cases. And I think that's leading to a lot of people saying, like, what's really going on here? And they're delayed for a bunch of reasons. There's a lot of administrative stuff behind that. But at its core, deportation as a result of a crime is real, and it is part of the law here in Canada for non-citizens.
The thing about like you gave the example, I hope that people are realizing that if he's not deported, then he'll be going to jail and then still be like a cost to our system. So like someone who kills that many people because they broke the law, even though he didn't intend, like it sounds like he didn't intend to kill people, but he still broke the law, and then that happened. Like it needs to be considered. And then if we don't follow the law, what else are we going to let go of later on?
And Leanne, we talked about health impact and health outcomes, and I think often mental health and emotional well-being of Canadians is not being considered. And so if you do have this two-tier criminal justice system, then what is that doing to the mental health and emotional well-being of Canadians who are seeing this firsthand? Like, a few years ago when Trudeau was in power, we remember there were so many F Trudeau flags. And when you talk to just everyday Canadians about Trudeau, you get a visceral reaction. People are like, "Oh, he's not so bad," but a lot were like, "I hate him. I hate his family. I want him out of this country. Like, he needs to be in jail." Like, it was such a visceral reaction towards, I've never seen, and I'm sure both of us are old enough to remember Stephen Harper, and we've never seen that reaction to a prime minister in this country ever before. And some of the supporters are like, "Oh, that's hateful," but I think what they're missing is the impact these policies have on our mental health and well-being is real. It's very real. And you match that with like a pandemic and lockdowns, and yes, people are upset, but I think the government sometimes doesn't realize that when they put forward ideas as policy that's more inclusive and accepting, it has a real impact on many Canadians' mental health. Because we have to look to our system as a place for like jurisprudence and justice. And if that's being like questioned, then like we ask ourselves, well, what's the point? Like, what's the point of anything, right? Like, what's the point of immigration if you can just bring in all these low-wage workers? Like, what's the point of an economic immigration stream? Like, what's the point of a criminal justice system if it's one rules for one set of people and another for another set? Like, that will affect people's emotional health and well-being. And I hate to go on a rant, but like in ancient civilizations, when people started seeing that the system no longer worked or it favored certain groups, that was the moment things started falling apart. Because no longer did the emperor or the state senate represent the people. It started representing a certain group, favoring a certain group. It started doing things that were immoral, unethical, and that always led to their downfall and demise. And I think we can learn a lot from ancient culture today.
Mm. Totally, like there's like this like hatred that we have for politicians
Yeah,
is something that we also need to talk about. Like I am convinced that the only reason why all the politicians, the ones that are up there with their face like visible, are narcissists or have narcissistic qualities is because of the way that we treat them. And like,
yeah,
and I don't like what happened at all, and that's why I left midwifery. It's why I started the
mm,
podcast. Like everyone knows, I don't like what happened,
hmm,
and I don't like what happened, but I don't believe in treating Trudeau like the way that we are,
hmm,
because he is human. He was put in this place where he's the one who's seen,
yeah,
and and then we're hating on his family. Like I live in Ottawa. I know where these children live,
hmm,
and they put their hoodies on. They get yelled at if their father's around. It's not okay.
no,
It's really not okay. I saw Trudeau hugging his children. He has real love for his children, and we need to
yeah,
like his family life needs to be completely separate from his work life. And
hmm,
like and when he's skiing, he should be skiing. Like
yeah,
be writing him letters about the things that we are upset about, and then he should be dealing with it when he is working. And we shouldn't be saying fuck our prime minister because they're doing a lot of things that are hard, things maybe that they
yeah,
don't believe in too. Just because they're the face, they're the ones who have to say the thing that is being pushed. I don't myself know how much power that person with the face has,
hmm,
but maybe you know more about that. But
no.
you know, you know,
But
um,
I think that, like, you're right. Yeah, I see this in the States too, right? Like when people feel their voices are not being heard, that's the moment when people start going down very dark paths of legitimizing like unbecoming behavior. When they start allowing that darkness in, it's because they feel like their voice no longer matters. And we see this on the left and the right. You know, if it wasn't F. Trudeau, I mean, I remember the Black Lives Matter protests where people were saying all types of things about white people. Um, uh, and I just think like that's not a society that I want either, you know? So I think when when there's real frustration and injustice and people feel like they're in a vacuum and they're not being heard, that's the inflection point where we have to actually start listening more, as hard as it is, you know?
mm,
Yeah.
yeah. You mean uh, like in the realm of like how we're treating our politicians? Like, you mean like listening to the like just a random person that?
No, I mean, leaning into the most uncomfortable positions as much as possible because, when the Freedom Convoy happened, I
Mm,
remember Trudeau was like, "Oh, there are a bunch of like these like kind of like what Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters, a basket of deplorables, etc." Similar language. And that was the moment when a lot of people were like, F it, I'm coming down, I'm supporting them, I'm going on GoFundMe, I'm going to send them money, etc. Because our own prime minister isn't leaning in
mm,
that moment to say, you know what, I disagree with them, but maybe just maybe they have a point. Like, let's get past the trucks and the honking. Like, there's a point here. And the point is these lockdowns aren't making sense to the average day Canadian.
yeah.
So maybe I need to actually modify what I'm telling Canadians, what I'm telling premiers. Maybe we should actually put a plan in place to say, listen, like, I hear you, and we are going to speed up our whatever processes to get Canadians living their normal lives again. Like, that would have been a moderate response. But instead, he doubled down against them. And I think that's what led to a lot of conflict. And similarly on the left, I think when we see, Black Lives Matter spray painted, or we see like the destruction of our statues, the beheading of statues, I think it's people literally crying out saying, hey, there's injustice happening towards our communities. and you're talking about capitalism or whatever, or you're negating our experience. When in fact, those on the right should lean in and be like, hey man, like, yeah, like if you do look at the stats, Black people do make much lower, even similar education, they make lower than a white graduate, right? In the workplace, we see this, like non-white employees are less likely to enter C-suite executive positions. I mean, these are issues, and I think the moderate response is, what can we do to get more non-white applicants to executive level positions? Right? Like, how can we make it so that they see themselves in these positions? Like, again, these are moderate responses. But I think what the right did in that moment is they kind of said, like, well, every man for himself. It's a meritocracy, like if you're really good, no one's gonna, turn that away. And I think people on the left were saying, yeah, but even with all this meritocracy, fearing, we're still facing this injustice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to protest. We're going to destroy public figure statues. We're going to, like, any element of colonialism, we're going to destroy. And it's a result of the right not leaning in and trying to listen in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And like, just like, I am like really offended by people who want to hire people just because of like they want to have the 50 Shades of Brown, you know.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that we need to be really careful about. Because sometimes we can also hire people just because of what they look like, and they're maybe not like they've never leaned into this position of leadership. And when you're in a position of leadership, you like, people come to you for all their opinions and their problems, and like we need to also kind of give them something to stand on, so that they know how to deal with the position that they're being given, rather than just like, oh, hey, you're Black, or you're brown, or you're whatever, and then so we want to look like this, and we want to, like, there's problems there too. So we have to be careful, because that's increasing racism if we are just kind of giving someone the power and then they don't know how to deal with it. And then we see that, we're like, well, that person wasn't capable of doing it. And then we maybe label all people who look like them to be not able to. So,
and the convergence is where all of us, right, left, we would all be upset if a Black, brown, LGBTQ member who went through leadership training was still passed up on a leadership position. Because all of us would be like, okay, now for sure there's bias that's being considered for this person's role, because this person is as trained and went through all the processes as a white person, etc. Right? So that's where all of us have concerns. And I think that's the core conversation we should be talking about, because the outlier conversations are I'm hiring 20% more Black people because my community is 20, like a certain percentage of Black. I think all of us would be like, hang on, like there should be core competencies needed for that position. That's not the conversation. I think the conversation is like, what about the Black, brown, and LGBTQ members in your own ranks that have the training and maybe, just maybe, they're mentally checked out because they're like, I did everything and there's still white people in the C-suite executives. Like, I'm not applying. And that's where I think, like, the not applying, like the silent quitting or whatever, I think that's where all sides would actually converge and actually agree. Interestingly enough, I did this kind of similarly early in my podcasting career. One of the first topics I covered was abortion. And I had pro-life and pro-choice groups on, and we chatted about it. And the convergence, which was so interesting, was all sides agreed that more education and open discussion on this is so needed in our school systems. Like, all of us should be openly discussing this. The real health impacts, the long-term health impacts. There's so many unknowns, and we're scared to talk about it. But if we did, we might actually see, quote, better health outcomes for young women in particular, because they'd be making better informed, and I say air quotes behind these, but more informed choices, and potentially so would young men as well. And so that convergence, and see, that's the thing. I think sometimes, like, the extremes pull us apart when really there's that core conversation that all of us would agree to. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
No, totally. The more we talk about it, and because that, like, I would be offended if someone hired me just because
Yeah,
of my descendants, and
of course.
because I have a lot to offer. That's
Yeah.
a lot, right? And I want someone to hire me because of that. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, like if someone doesn't apply, that is an issue that we also need to talk about. And that because we're having
Yeah.
this discussion, I never thought of that, and then you brought it up. So you know, so
Yeah. I think that there's like, and I haven't done enough study and research on this, but I think that there are, for example, in office spaces, I think there's a lot of Black women in particular who are in administrative roles that could very well be in leadership positions. But because many don't see enough Black women in leadership, they don't apply. And actually, I chatted with somebody about this too, and they said, I wish I could hire more diverse applicants, but nobody applies. I only get like pools of white men and mostly white women. And I'm like, maybe what are we doing? What forget showing people like why are we talking about like having the uncomfortable conversation with say Black women or LGBTQ men or women or gender diverse people to say like why aren't like what's happening here? And I guarantee you all of them would say like I see the game for what it is and I don't want to play it kind of thing, you know? Um, so I think it's an uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's so important that we talk about it for sure.
mhm. My father, who's like he raised two girls, and was raised by like just a hardcore, like a real feminist. Like she
Hmm.
was really upset by not being able to go to school, and then when she had her
Mm,
kids, she had a eight.
mhm,
She just told everyone gets to go to school, and you all get the same help from all of us. Like, and it's just that was really big for her, and she became a teacher.
mhm,
But my father, he goes and volunteers abroad, and he knows because he raised us, and he'll tell me we'll go to a talk together, and he's like, "What do you have to say, Deanne?"
mhm,
And to a politician who's in front of us, and because he knows that women don't go to the microphone first. And when
mhm,
we're abroad, I went to Ghana with him, and I was seeing him talk, and he was like, he does environmental things to that are sustainable for communities so that they can live off their land and things like that. And then
mhm,
the men are all getting into it, and then he like at a certain point he stops them. He's like, "Okay, I want to hear the women." And
mhm.
so, and it's just like it's just important to
Yeah.
show each other how we're doing different things, and also
Mhm,
point out to girls and to women that we're not speaking up and that our voices, that what we think is really important, um, and
yeah.
probably in smaller settings. Like it's so hard to even have started my podcast, and I don't
Yeah, I
think
know.
very many people would do that, like put themselves out.
Mhm.
People think I'm crazy because I'm like telling people that what we're doing in the healthcare system is not evidence based. Like people don't want to even hear
Yeah,
that. It takes
yeah.
so much courage to for me to say we're taking advantage of our pregnant clients for
Mhm,
money. And
mhm,
so, like and it's probably because I'm from my father.
mhm.
So it's just really important to just start, like, be aware of that if you have a little girl, and then, and like, where can you kind of hear someone else's voice who's not stepping up. And so I guess that there is some pros, like, when you're applying for jobs and you're like, oh, are you LGBTQ, or are you
Mhm.
have to be careful though, but
Yeah,
I'm skeptical of those things. But
yeah.
if the right people are behind the scenes, then maybe it could be helpful. Um,
No, I agree with you. I think that it is very weird how we've gone down that path. And
yes.
like we've looked at people at a superficial level instead of asking the deeper question of like, do you actually want to be in a C-suite executive position? You've done the training, like what's happening? Like why are we seeing less applicants if in fact that's happening? That's the conversation. And I think there's a childlike curiosity we have to foster and like maintain in our society. We can't go down this path of absolutism that, oh, we just need more Black people. We just need more LGBTQ members. we have to be children and be curious and lean in. And, like a kid doesn't know if the stove is hot until he puts his hand on it, right? Like we have to put our hand on the hot stove and we have to be able to, because otherwise, how are we ever going to know? Right. So maintaining that throughout our life is so important. And it's so fascinating that you started this podcast and your father like leaned in to have your opinion first, or like women's opinions first. I think that's so important. And it's to maintain that. That's the hard part. It's to be consistent in being a kid and asking kid like stupid, dumb questions
Mhm.
until we normalize that. Like we have to normalize asking childlike wonderment, childlike amazement. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why we look back to kids and we're so amazed at how like they're learning all these things, for the first time. We should maintain that throughout our life.
This is so when I was practicing, I would be asking the people that tell us what to do. Like, so what's the evidence for all these indications for us to do this? And then like, and no one else would ask those questions.
Yeah.
And then you find out that there's no evidence, and there's evidence that it could harm.
There you go.
So, anyways, yeah, it's just I'm talking about my I'm like, oh, like you're my, I'm like.
I love that. I love that. That's what we need, man. We need more of that. We need to culture and foster that in our school systems. We need our politicians to be more open to listening to people, to listening to their stories and what they're going through, and being okay with like being told that your decisions had real harm on communities.
Yeah.
It's so important that we nurture this.
I find it's really important to not look at anyone as an authority. I feel like it's like a safety issue. And
yeah,
like if you're like, let's say a midwife, you don't see, the SOGC or like, the people who are like the association guideline makers as our authority, like that we're allowed to question those, and then we're allowed to tell our clients that like this isn't perfect, like we're allowed, and then also seeing our politicians like as that as well. And then if I decide to have a job as a midwife, or I decide to have a job as a politician, we need to lean into service. Like it needs what my desire is to service people. And yeah, we'll make mistakes. As a midwife, I did do mistakes. I was really upfront about them when I found out. I found that that's really important for people, for trust and things like that. But we need to learn that there's a human in front of us. And if we were to treat Justin Trudeau, that we love to hate, like with respect, with what he was given COVID, and he had to do something about it. His government had to do something about it. Can we at least look at him through that lens? And he had to follow what the rest of the world was doing at first. Can we at least look at him with that sort of compassion when we're speaking of like the things that went wrong, the lots of that went wrong? And if he can lean into the idea of service, then then that would be good. But we're not going to hire politicians that want to lean into service if we treat them like crap,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good, very, very astute point too. And, especially with the pandemic and vaccinations, I mean, I always thought like, why aren't we talking about like, this seems like a very intrusive thing to tell everyone to do. But at the same time, I don't know the pressure that the Prime Minister's office is under by the United States government, by other G7 countries. It very well could be that, and I don't know if Trudeau thought this, but say I was the Prime Minister, and people have asked me this before, but they're like, what would you do if you were the Prime Minister during the pandemic? And I would say, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I would literally say, yes, there's a vaccine. I can't in good faith mandate this that every Canadian get, because I don't know the impact that this will have on 40 million people and their bodies, etc. I know that vaccine injuries are real, and I know that this is not widely tested. So in good faith, I can't do that. But if the US administration called me and said, hey man, like you're kind of playing with fire here, because if it wasn't for our government, you wouldn't be getting vaccines. So you better be mandating this, because we have to make sure that inter-travel, whatever, we can't have you singing a different song than us. We're so closely connected, right? Like, then my opinion would have to change. Or if the European Union was like, we're all following this mandate, you better fall in line. Like there's other pressure
Yeah.
at play.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're like, shit, I can't even say my opinion. My
Yeah.
opinion is made for me.
Mhm.
So to your point, you're right. He's human. These are humans in roles, and there's other pressures we have no idea about that they probably see the BS and they can't even say anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a podcast on the gun law that was being passed but what isn't going through. And the person, Remy, who was speaking about it, said that the minister didn't even believe in this law, but he had to be presenting it.
There you
So
go.
it's just
Pretty crazy, eh?
yeah, it's like what are we doing to our politicians? And maybe we need to look at their roles and what's happening. Hopefully, maybe some could open up to us and say what they're going through. Maybe,
That's an interesting point, Leanne. Like maybe we should get to a point where politicians say, "Hey, man, listen, I agree with you. By the way, I can't say anything about it." Like that would give us so much confidence to know that it's not the politician that's the issue. It's these lobbyists, it's these other external pressures that we as Canadians need to be highlighting more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Imagine if Justin Trudeau could go anonymously speak about the reasoning why he did through reasoning, like inside he was told this, and so he believed that person. If we could just like listen to his story without him having to protect anyone, and his face, you can even tell that it was him. Like what we would maybe eventually learn could be really great, but we just don't have that capacity yet. But yeah.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And when you're the prime minister, there's industries that support your gross domestic product. There's industries that employ Canadians that you, as the prime minister, you can't create 10,000 jobs overnight. But a power plant, an auto sector coming to Canada, they can do that very quickly. And suddenly that person has a lot more power politically because that's 10,000 people paying taxes. That's 10,000 people paying into your healthcare system. That's 10,000 people paying into your social. There's so many rippling out effects to the economy that does. So that gives that person at the head of the table a lot of power with the prime minister. And maybe the prime minister doesn't care about the auto sector, like doesn't care about that, but they can't say that because there's a real impact on job creation in Canada. So you're right. It'll be interesting. It would be very interesting to have that conversation with Trudeau, to hear what he actually. I don't actually think anyone's heard his honest opinion about some of these things.
Exactly. Yeah. Where was his heart in all of this?
Yeah.
Okay, we had like such a deep conversation.
I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. You honestly, you educated me a lot. I had lots of questions around immigration. If you ever do a deep dive on refugees, I'd love to hear about that too. We'll see what you get into, and then we'll see what I'm curious about. If you want to add anything, is there anything that you're like, oh, I want to tell people this because I missed the question or didn't think of it?
Good question, Leanne. Just that I think at a very high level, Canada and Canadians, we have to remember too, we are the only country in the world, and I always say this, we're the only country in the world where there's such high levels of acceptance of immigration and the feelings of acceptance by immigrants in Canada. Ipsos and Angus Reid have done polls. 98% of newcomers feel welcome in Canada. Many Canadians welcome immigrants. We are not like parts of Europe where they have high immigration and there's a really strong anti-immigration movement that leads to violence, protests, in some cases, extreme cases, killings. Like, we are so thankful that we live in Canada that that's not happening. And that's so rare. That is like beyond rare. I mean, we are truly the most accepting nation in the world. I would say more than the United States. Like, we are so accepting. But all of that can change if our immigration policies change without us knowing about it. And I think that has been tested over the past few years. And still, Canadians are very accepting of immigration. So, one thing I just let Canadians know is, like, despite everything I've said on this podcast, we are the most welcoming nation in the world. And our politicians should not take that for granted, because what we've seen in Europe is that that same sentiment can shift, and it can shift dramatically, and it can change and alter our social fabric. And I just hope that that doesn't happen in Canada. And the only way we can get there is by having open and honest conversations. And so politicians can be held to account on some of these policies. And so I'm glad to see them changing course a little bit. But again, more needs to be done. And I think more will be done moving forward.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. We shouldn't be taken advantage of, and that we should be promoting this respect for one another, no matter what we're from. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Christopher.
Thanks, Leanne. This is great.
Yeah. And then thank you so much to the listener for listening to the whole thing and educating yourself on things that matter and things that we don't speak about very much, so it's really good that we have that. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks everyone for listening. This is great.